Okay, you know the drill. Thank you so much for having any interest whatsoever in a place to talk. Thank you for being here. We're going to talk today about a passage where Jesus says he starts the Beatitudes. He starts the Sermon on the Mount with the Beatitudes. We're going to talk about the first two of those phrases or those sayings today. The question I'm kind of pondering myself is, do I even want to be poor in spirit? Is that something I desire? Do I want to be one of those who mourn? Uh, is that really the right question to ask? I don't know. I would love to hear your questions. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about this passage. Reach out anytime. Let's chat. Okay, so in the passage, what's happening is he sees a crowd. He goes up on a mountainside. He sits down. His disciples come and he begins to teach them. And he says, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. The first thing we have to think about is, what does that word blessed mean? When you hear the word blessed, what are some of your first thoughts? How do you imagine poor in spirit is like or dislike being poor in wealth or money or possessions? What do you think about that? Is it the same thing, or is it something totally different? Why do you imagine Jesus starts his key, most important, most talked about text, most important uh, oratory, most important sermon, you might call it, with these concepts that seem to be maybe negative in our society, probably in Rome, early early church history. These are ideas that seem to be not not winning ideas, not the most exciting ideas, but rather something different. Why does he start there? St. Augustine taught that the poverty of spirit was the first step into the kingdom of heaven. He argued that other spiritual things, all other spiritual things, they kind of hinge on or they start with this poverty of spirit, this humility, faith, hope, and love. They depend on humility. This drove some change in the Roman world where wealth and power and success and status, those were the those were the hallmarks of what a successful person looked like. Do you think modern day America is a lot like the time that St. Augustine lived in when when money and power and success and status, those were all money, power, and status were the definition of success? I think we've got a pretty clear picture of what success looks like in America and looks like throughout most of history. How do you think Jesus might define success differently? If blessed means happy, what sense can you make of this passage? Does it make sense to you that happy are people who are poor in spirit? Now, if humility is what poor in spirit means, then I could see how humble people can be happy. I get that. But people who are mourning, do you think about them as happy? Mourning as happy? Mourning and being comforted, even being comforted. That doesn't sound like happiness. It sounds like relief from mourning. Okay, Augustine made poverty of spirit or humility the cornerstone of faith, hope, and love. But Martin Luther comes along and he makes it the cornerstone of grace and thereby salvation. Is salvation possible outside or aside from humility? I kind of wonder if Martin Luther and Augustine were to communicate, or if a group of well-versed theologians were to come together today and think about Martin Luther and Augustine. I wonder if they might also find themselves talking about Paul, the Apostle Paul's contribution to the story and to modern day Christianity. To some extent, I find myself wondering if the Apostle Paul has more influence on modern day Christians than Jesus. The Apostle Paul, the one that never met Jesus face to face, flesh to flesh, but he comes along and tells this story about when Jesus appeared to him and kind of puts puts a turn in the journey of Christianity. I'm not here to throw Paul out, and I'm not here to doubt or to question Paul, but I'm thinking I could see, because there are theologians who do that. And I'm not calling myself a theologian by any means. I'm just a guy who's been asking a lot of questions all my life. Um, but I could see people, or actually, it's happening. People are saying, does Paul pollute the gospel that Jesus came to teach, or do they go together? And was Paul a great continuation of the Christian faith and the Christian story? In the early 1930s, Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote about renouncing violence and completely embraced suffering over violence. He was totally opposed. He was totally pacifist in the 1930s. As Hitler rises to power in the 1940s, maybe I got that wrong, but in the 1940s, Dietrich Bonhoeffer begins to be involved in some secret operations that include plots to assassinate Hitler. For some reason, that whole thing just kind of comes to my mind as I think about poverty of spirit. If you've got true poverty of spirit, if you've got true humility, can you be part of an assassination attempt, or planning, or staging, or uh, I'm just thinking out loud. Bonhoeffer, kind of his idea and thoughts towards the end there, or in the 1940s, his thought was pacifism is the goal. It's the best choice. But sometimes situations and circumstances where somebody that's evil rises to power, um, doing an evil thing and throwing yourself on the grace of God is what you have to do. I find that hard to think through and hard to understand. My desire, my plan, my goal is to be a pacifist. I was talking to this gentleman. I've kind of made this little friendship chatting with this guy at the gym every once in a while. He's telling me a story about this time he's working for the city and they have to cut the water off at the road. That kind of puts some people without water for a little bit of time while they're doing a repair. And there's three men down there and they're working. And this woman comes walking out. I don't want to call her Karen, but I don't want to. I don't want to. I know lots of people named Karen that are great people and aren't this type of people, but for some reason Karen has become the term we use for this kind of person. So she's coming out in a bathrobe and she's yelling at these guys, or she's coming out to these guys with a real, you know, powerful persona, and he says, "Hey, you're completely safe here. We're going to get this fixed as quickly as we can, but I want you to just be aware of the fact that you just walked up on three men with this this spirit that might not be safe in other circumstances." I thought he did such a, I thought he, I mean, but what he was saying was this woman, she didn't know the cards these guys were holding. She didn't know the attitude and or the kind of people they were. And he was just pointing out that she might want to be a little bit more careful in other situations. And anyway, I thought that was so wise, so interesting. There's something about poverty of spirit that causes you to. I can imagine it making you happier. It's just anyway. Hitler, Bonhoeffer, pacifism. I find myself wanting to be a pacifist. He and I were talking. That same guy and I were talking, and he was asking me. He was telling me that self-preservation is higher to him than any idea of being a pacifist. So he would say, in a situation where it comes down to two people and one has to lose, he wants to. He would be a self-preserving personality. And I think that's the human tendency. But I think Jesus came and gave us a different message. This idea that if it comes down to you or me, Jesus says, let me be the one to go to the cross. Let me be the one to die. And that is humility like I can't imagine anywhere else. And so I find myself drawn to that kind of pacifistic lifestyle, that kind of humility, that kind of so. Am I a pacifist? Am I a Christian? I want to be, but I don't know how I would react in a situation where it became my life or yours. What would I do? Um, but but for some reason, that's what goes through my mind as I think about poverty of spirit. Let's look at those who mourn. Do you feel that you've been comforted in your times of mourning, or do you feel like you're like Jesus? You're wrong. I've mourned and nobody comforted me. How do you feel about that? Um, do you believe that the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who are poor in spirit? Should we seek to be poor in spirit? Should we seek to mourn? Or are those things that happen to us through various challenges in our life and it's not something we can seek? If I had to sum up today's text as an assignment, I believe I'd say this: humility and resilience are valuable. They're valuable tools to master or to develop. And I'm proud to say that I've learned to be the most humble man on earth. No, no, no. I'm totally kidding about that. Um, it's just, it's just as I think about humility, I find myself thinking, how do you develop and how do you understand and how do you know if you're achieving those things, if you're growing towards humility? It's hard. It's a challenging thought. Anyway, like and subscribe, comment, ask questions. I asked some questions here. You see these questions. You've heard me ask these questions. You have better ones. You have better conversations. You have better questions. You can make this conversation so much better and so much more interesting and so much more impactful to those around us. So come be a part. If you're not close by and you can't be a part, ask the questions in the comments. Like and subscribe. Participate with us wherever you're at, however you're on this journey. And if you say, Josh, I want to do what you're doing. I want to have conversations in my community. Reach out. I'll do everything I can to help you succeed in that endeavor. Hey, thanks for listening, and I look forward to, if you're in the area, come see us, 1546 Burkford Church Road, 10:30 every Sunday morning.